to cope with different opinions or different points of view, and are absolutely committed to their way of thinking. And so, indeed, one of our fundamental British values is tolerance. Counter-extremism becomes about the promotion of pluralism and tolerance, and this seems to some extent try and contradict my above criticism talking about kind of promotion of hegemony, that it seems to actually potentially promoting diversity and promoting tolerance. But in fact, I think what's very clear is that when there is a promotion of diversity and promotion of tolerance, it's done within a very carefully curated sphere where, as long as those core values of the moderate centre are not challenged, you can be diverse. But it's also very clear that when you stray across the boundary into the too diverse, too plural, too different, too counter-hegemonic, that's when the violence of that counter-extremism can emerge. I think a particularly good example of this is again in the UK. There's something called the Prevent Duty, which asks that every school teacher, every university lecturer, every childminder in a nursery must inform the authorities when they believe that someone under their duty of care may be being radicalized or might be an extremist. And what's very interesting, looking at all of these examples, is it's absolutely fascinating to see how wide that berth of what is considered extreme may be, and how the vast majority of those that are referred to the authorities in the UK are Muslim. And so if you are a young Muslim in the UK and you are politically active and you maybe are wearing a badge that suggests we should boycott Israel, then you're likely to be informed to the police. So how should we try and understand the peace that this counter-extremism is trying to engender? Well, I'd say, looking at all three of these together, there's an image that always pops back in my head, and it's not in the paper, but it's something I can't ever stop thinking about, which is the image of a castle under siege. It seems like if you think about a castle, there's an inside to the castle. That in there is the moderate. There's a certain level of tolerance of diversity, and there's a certain level of pluralism that is allowed within there. But it also holds on to certain values that that cannot be challenged. And I would put the legitimacy of state violence as being one of those examples. Counter-extremism also then creates those walls. It delineates the inside and the outside, and it violently excludes, but it also violently includes through forms of epistemic violence. And so I think when I'm looking at this castle under siege, I'm thinking, is that a peaceful peace that counter-extremism seems to be producing? And actually, what is that peace that is trying to be produced? And I think when we think about trying to solve extremism, there's far too much emphasis placed on the need for consensus. We need to remove extremism and then there will be peace. And that removal process is where the violence of counter-extremism is taking place. So what the paper then tries to present as an answer to this question, this is the same question we had at the beginning, was to look at other forms of peace within peace studies that may answer or offer an answer to this question. And within that, I examine the world of agonistic peace. So a lot of our conceptions of peace rely on the idea of consensus, agreement, and then there will be peace. Agonistic peace, contrarily, it begins from the position that conflict is imminent, that disagreement is imminent, and that the exclusion of that conflict is itself a violent process. So this is very much a new part of my studies, the next chapter, if you will. But exploring modes and mechanisms whereby we're not trying to exclude that antagonism, but what scholars talk about from transforming antagonism into agonism. And I suppose I've found myself dwelling on a sort of a cheap pun of, rather than countering extremism, rather than that sort of violent exclusion process to create that hegemonic consensus, that through encountering extremism, through recognizing the imminence of that conflict, rather than relying on that consensus, relying on that exclusion, that perhaps that's a more a peaceful mode through which extremism can be approached. And this was a quotation from a scholar, Rosemary Shinko, on the issue of agonistic peace, that I thought was a rather fitting place to end.
Thank you.